so things worked out for the most part. I don't know how comfortable franchises are going to be just, hitching themselves to this aging superstar on a roster that's just not going to get better. So, for Stephen Curry's sake, when you look at all these factors, it starts to make sense for Steph to be traded elsewhere. But when you look at the Warriors situation, it also makes sense for them to want to move on from Stephen Curry, which feels blasphemous to say. Like, Steph is in that echelon of players where it's like, yeah, you just don't trade that guy. No matter his age, no matter the context of your roster, you really just don't trade that guy. But also, is that just an unwritten rule that you're going to hinder your franchise?
Yeah, you just gotta think about reality though. If you understand that your roster not gonna be anything in the next 3-4 years and that you have to rebuild, like if your picks are gone, most of your money is spent, you know what I'm saying? And you have a bunch of salary but you don't have a roster to show for it, it might be time, my boy. Like we understand how great Curry was. We appreciate him for being in the Bay, but send that boy over there to LA and play with LeBron. So LeBron, him, and AD can go ahead and go crazy one last time. You hear me? But send that boy to a contender. Send him to the Miami Heat or something, man. Like just do something productive. Something productive, man. That's all it takes. Cause obviously the Warriors ain't gonna be productive for a few years, and y'all might want to start that rebuild now.
Franchise on because of that unwritten rule, or are you actually going to just do what's best for this team? Especially when you take into consideration that the Warriors front office is not what's his fucking name on TV now all the time. I'm blanking on it, but he was a very key part of that Warriors roster coming together. He also had a ton of loyalty to these players. And it's like the main reason that he left the team because he didn't want to be there when things fell apart. Like he jumped off of that sinking ship just in time to avoid a lot of the.
If you're worried that your child won't get into the college they rightfully should get into, you may be right. But in the next 3 minutes, all
the heartache, but the current administration does not have that same attachment. Obviously, I'm not saying they don't recognize the value that Stephen Curry brings to the franchise. Obviously, they do. They'd have to be blind not to. But they also don't have some long-founded loyalty to the guy. They don't have some, look, we are obligated to give this guy everything he wants. And
yeah, and at the end of the day, it is a business, man. Just think of it like that. Like we done created so many memories, so many emotional memories, done created so many connections, and have so many attachments made. But it's still a business, and without the business, this will never have been able to be created. We gotta appreciate the circle of life, man. I mean, we could always ride it out into the sunset, but you gotta think the sun not on Earth. So what the fuck is we really riding to? You know what I'm saying? We just going around in a circle, looking dumb. I mean, it look good, it sound good. If you point it, the camera in the right angle on photo gray, you can make it look like you went into the sunset. But we all know the truth, my boy. And life is gonna continue to go on and on. So y'all might as well send that boy to the Lakers or send him to the Heat. For real.
Do everything we can to keep him around. I would understand if they didn't quite feel that way, given the guy's age. Again, if we had a prime Stephen Curry, none of this is what would be discussed. Like, none of it to begin with. Because, sure, if a couple more years into his prime he was dealing with this shit-ass roster, then that would be a problem that people do not tolerate dealing with. I mentioned Chris Paul earlier. Chris Paul's on the Spurs. My bad. Forgot about that. Don't know why I said that. There's really two directions that the Warriors can go here. They cash all of their young assets in for some sort of star player. Ideally, you get another rotation piece or there. You're probably keeping Draymond Green in this equation. Maybe you can keep one of those young guys. Maybe you can flip some of your older role players like Gary Payton or Kevon Looney for slightly better ones, using other future draft capital. Is this franchise going to be willing to lay it all on the line for 2 to 3 to 4 years of Stephen Curry? I don't know. That line's getting blurred, and where I said in the past a couple of years ago, like, hey, Steph is one of those dudes you do everything you can to contend with them while you have them. Steph isn't going to be this guy forever, and I feel like it could be a gigantic mistake in the long run to do exactly that. And I think the reason that we haven't seen the Warriors go all in with a move like that is they're hedging their bets that that's exactly the case. That's like, look, I don't know if we give everything up for whoever it may be, and then we just automatically are a contender from there, and we can get Steph Curry a 5th ring. I just don't know that that prospect is very likely. What I do think...
Cooper Flag! The Warriors get Cooper Flag! Sight, did he already get drafted? Or is he in college right now? Somebody let me know. I told you I'm living in my fucking car. It's hot as hell. Oh yeah, it is bugs though, so I do gotta be mindful and not let that shit all the way down. Matter of fact, I just want to crack it a little bit. Y'all have to go along for me with that, man. Y'all gotta understand the journey. I'm trying to get monetized off YouTube, so listen. If you watch the full video, you're gonna help me get into a crib with better setup, and I'm gonna be able to create better videos. So, hey, tune in.
Is very likely, though, that if you did trade Stephen Curry, even though he is older, even though he makes a lot of money, you could still get quite a bit of draft capital, quite a bit of young players, because Steph is still good enough to be the best player on a title team, and anybody in that tier, even if they're only going to be in that tier for another 2 seasons.
And that would be the smartest thing to do. You know what I'm saying? Because you guys aren't the Spurs. Let's keep it a buck. You guys aren't the Spurs. The Spurs were able to keep their dynasty intact, and they was able to like continuously put the right pieces around their players. Like continuously put the right pieces around their players. You understand? So you guys, that's what you guys failed at these last 5 years. Like the Spurs making the right moves is what really it was David Robinson and Tim Duncan getting drafted. You feel me? 10 years apart, 10, 20 years apart. You feel me? That's what really extended the dynasty, but they still made the right moves and picked the right people. And that's something the Warriors failed at doing these last couple of years, which is why the dynasty inevitably is going to die nasty. You know what I'm saying? So sell Stephen Curry. Put him on the team. I want to see him hoop for some real folks. Y'all is trash.
Is going to elicit a lot of attention on the trade market. Will Steph Curry leave the Warriors? I'm leaning yes, because I'm staring at the roster right now on Basketball Reference. I'm looking at what assets they have, the young players they have, the capital they have, the money that they have invested in this team. And I'm just, it's hard pressed for me to imagine him staying under these circumstances. They can make an all-in move, but I also feel like they have continued to give indication after indication that they're not going to make that all-in move. And I feel like, if anything, the value of some of their young assets has dissipated because they have held out. Kuminga's value, I'm not sure if it's gotten better or worse than it would have been a couple of years ago, because he had a pretty good season last year, even though he does have a couple of fairly obvious glaring limitations. He still is a very good player and a young asset that any team in the league would be happy to have, especially
Who?
a rebuilding team. But is it enough to be like, we'll give you our all-NBA caliber player? Unless that player has specifically asked to go to the Golden State Warriors, I don't think that's the case. Moses Moody is unfortunately more of a theory than an actual basketball player, because Steve Kerr has continued to shaft him in the rotation for pretty much his entire tenure with the franchise. And he'll take the guy out. He has a 10-minute stretch where he plays really good basketball. He hits like 2 3-pointers, and then Kerr puts him on the bench. That's another factor that I have yet to mention, is that I feel like Steve Kerr is just not a good coach anymore. I think a lot of his ideas and his system and a lot of the principles that end up winning the Warriors championship, he has direct responsibility for. And
basically, he not Greg Popovich. Basically, he's saying he not Greg Popovich is what I heard. He a good coach, but he ain't Greg Popovich is what I heard.
Direct attachment to. And as a result, he is one of the greatest coaches of all time, just purely based on that accomplishment. But
he ain't Phil Jackson is basically what I heard.
Two things can be true at once. He can be the guy who brought that value to the franchise a decade ago that really elevated them to be where they are today alongside Stephen Curry, while simultaneously him just not being all that good at coaching anymore, because his decision-making has been extremely questionable pretty much the last couple of years, and I just don't know that he's definitely not the type of coach where you go, well, we got Steve Kerr, that'll make up for the fact that our roster sucks. It doesn't. Steve Kerr's not that type of coach, and I don't think you have the system in place to allow that. So trade feels inevitable to me, unless they just have some ace up their sleeves that I don't quite see coming to be. From there, what does that mean for Stephen Curry's legacy? Do we think that it impacts Stephen Curry's legacy negatively, that he ends up leaving the team? I don't think in any kind of way that's massive to a degree. You know, there is... I feel the same way about it the way that I would about, like, the fact that Dwayne Wade went to the Bulls and the Cavs briefly. Like, yeah, we aren't happy about that. We like to pretend it didn't happen. But in most people's headcanon, Dwayne Wade is basically a Heat lifer. Like, yes, he did spend a portion of his career elsewhere, but we don't really talk about that part, and we don't really care about it. Now, that could be different if Stephen Curry goes to a team that he then wins a title for. That actually gets super interesting. And I don't know if there's a comparison there for me that I could think of. Like, I just don't know of
Stephen Curry to the Denver Nuggets? What?
a player who won a title with like 4 titles with the same franchise. I think all 4 of them as the best player, but at the very least 2 of them, you know, means everything to that franchise. And then he goes somewhere else and wins a title for another franchise. I don't think there's a precedent for that. Obviously, like, LeBron's won titles for different franchises. That's not the same thing as having spent multiple years there. Like, what if Michael Jordan, you know, went to the Knicks after championship number 5, won 1 there? How would that affect his legacy? How would that be different? And I actually think that's interesting for older players who more or less have their legacy pretty much solidified, where their legacy is solidified, but also they are still good enough to do things to add to it. But also, if you're good enough to do things to add to it, you can also be good enough to subtract to it if you use that ability in the wrong way, if that makes some sense. Like, I've seen people arguing that LeBron and the Bronny situation is negatively affecting the guy's legacy. Like, that's where I go, that's a little silly, that's not going to happen. But it's certainly a discussion that people have. I don't think Warriors
I ain't gonna lie, I don't know what the hell we talking about right now.
Fans would hold any level of distaste towards Steph. I don't think they would give him shit.
So basically, if Stephen Curry left the Warriors, would that mess up his legacy? Yeah, of course. The fuck? Of course. Especially if you ain't win no championship. Oh yeah, let me stop being so harsh. Let me be a little more professional. But yeah, that mess up his, you know what I'm saying? Let me just be me. That's gonna fuck up his reputation, gang. That's gonna, yeah, like, it's gonna fuck it up. But it depends on what you do after you leave. If I want to keep it a buck with you, you know what I'm saying? It depends on what you do after you leave, because you can leave, get another ring, like he said, and now you the man. Fuck all the haters. Or you can leave and just go to a fucking trash team and become Bradley Beal. Then it's like, yeah, you fucking loser. You know what I'm saying? Bradley Beal would have been better off staying on the Wizards. I mean, if that's how he want to compete for a chip, I mean, you know what I'm saying? You compete for the 8th seed. I heard they got a tournament for that motherfucker, you know? So that's just how I see it, folks. But this is going to be the end of the video. If y'all liked it, or if y'all want to help me get out the fucking car into a crib and help make better content for y'all, then please watch the full video. But if you made this far, you watch the full video. Like, subscribe. That's all you really got to do, man. All right, we out of here.